All right, Kelly, take it away.
All righty. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Kelly Myers and I'm Vice President of Borden Perlman Sports. Borden Perlman has had a long and productive partnership with NATYCAA. We're thankful for our relationship with NATYCAA and the privilege of being able to sponsor this event today. My experience as a collegiate student athlete and coach on Division III level led me to a business career in the secondary athletic insurance market. At Borden Perlman, we are constantly learning about new challenges that our colleges face and really enjoy partnering with our collegiate clients to come up with value-based solutions. We have faced nothing like this pandemic. The tentacles reaching out from COVID-19 affect everything that has to do with athletic participation, travel, scheduling, athletic training, your meals, mental health, roster management. The pandemic has no boundaries. Hopefully you will find some takeaways in today's discussion that are helpful in your athletic department. So let's get right into it and I'll introduce our panel. From Division III, Washington University in St. Louis, the John M. Shale Director of Athletics, Anthony Azama. The Director of Athletics at Chico State, Anita Barker, I'm sorry, Anita. The Director of Admissions, Student Affairs, and Vice President at Midway University in Kentucky, Rusty Kennedy. The Director of Athletics and Assistant Vice President of Student Engagement and Inclusion at Genesee Community College in New York, Kristen, Schuth. So I want to introduce our topic today. Our topic is about budget issues and challenges that athletic departments experienced in the spring of 2020 and to the current date, and what the expectations are for the coming winter and spring seasons. Also, what the 2021 athletics year may look like, and what our panelists see as future challenges, and how our past and current experiences will help us all be better prepared in 2021. As you can see, we've got a diverse panel, and they'll all offer experiences from NAIA, D2, D3, and a junior college perspective. Just a quick note that we encourage you all that are joining the call today to use the Q&A function in the chat on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll get to as many of those questions and comments that become relevant as we move along. So let's get this going. And the first question that I'm going to ask is going to be of Anthony from Washington University. And Anthony, in some of our previous discussions, we learned that your focus at Washington University has really been to develop strategy that maintains and protects the student athlete experience. So if you could, right now, give our group some insight today on how you maintain this focus while navigating these budget issues around athletics that were affected by the pandemic.
Well, first of all, thank you, Coach Kelly, for hosting this topic and this panel. Really appreciate it. To be perfectly honest with you, we were able to maintain by staying true to our core mission. And at the end of the day, it comes down to really, who are we? Regardless of whether it's a pandemic or no pandemic, what experience, what service are we trying to provide? And we really looked at it in three areas. One, alignment. Two, assessment. Three, execution. From alignment, I have to use what this our business manager, what she shared in an email pre-COVID. It stated, clearly connect mission and strategic priorities to budget. Strategy should inform your spending, and your spending should reflect your strategic investment in the mission. All of our programs have a strategic plan. I just want to preface that. Second is assessment of the core operation to provide a service or experience for our student athletes. And we needed to assess the budget items. And we used the priority pyramid, the priority one, mandatory and required. With that's things such as compliance and Title IX. Priority two, necessary and essential. That's things such as conference games. That's probably weighs more than non-conference games. And then priority 3, value added. And usually that's the first thing to cut, right? But we also needed to know exactly what are our budget thresholds, the percentage tiers of reduction, as far as that reduction without reducing the student athlete experience. We thought that was important. And it's important for not just me, but also surrounding yourself with a lot more smart people than myself. We needed to know. And, you know, going into pre-COVID, it was 7% to where we were starting to cut to the bone of what we wanted to make sure we were able to provide and aligning with our mission. The third thing really is execution. Measurable outcomes beyond the scoreboard. 1, 2, checks and balancing through communication. We always want to, know before we need to know. And that helps us best determine when we need to start sourcing above and beyond funds. So really it came back to alignment. What is at the critical core of the business model of our mission, of what we are holding ourselves accountable to, whether we're going through a recession, pandemic, or better times. Assessment, how do we evaluate, things so we can get away from legacy projects and initiatives and more the strategic core for us to be able to continue to make sure we can hang our hat that we're providing an experience as well as a service to these student athletes. And then we got to execute, and we got to stay on top of trying to execute. Regardless of whether there's a game day or not a game day, we're still need to show up and provide a service and experience to our student athletes.
Anthony, those are some great thoughts. And one of the things that kind of hit me when you're saying that is you talked about, I think this is what you talked about, and I'll ask you again, but you talked about a budget that doesn't, what I heard was a budget, I might paraphrase here, that doesn't reduce or diminish the student athlete experience. Can you talk about that just a little bit more?
Yeah, we had to identify between priority 1 and priority 2 at the core of what we needed to provide, and really trying to figure out how do you measure quality and how you put a number on that, right? We really need to have those tough discussions with administration and then with coaches, and utilizing that strategic plan to say, when we start peeling back the layers, at the end of the day, what do we really need to provide and show up with for these student athletes? And to me, a budget goes hand in hand with not only numbers, because numbers never lie, but the reality of it never gives the full picture, and people. Those are our 2 core to what we need to provide. And for me as a leader, I had to go into it with the mindset of I have to do everything I can not to cut jobs and not to try to cut programs. And really, when you're able to explain it, Coach Kelly, in a way of the why, the what, the how, and in that order, people they're going to vent a little bit, but at least they have an understanding. Because I think as a leader, you have to be brutally honest, and you have to be really try to be as transparent as you can. So I have evolved from an incremental budgeting process to an initiative-based budgeting process. And really make sure that we have laser-like focus, that at the end of the day, if I ever get called to the Vice Chancellor's Office for Student Affairs, we're on the same page as far as what are we trying to provide for these young people at the end of the day. And it creates some tough conversations, but tough conversations usually come out on the other end of 2 people having a better understanding of what are we really trying to do? Because layers get added when things go well, when things are going well. You start adding things, and you're really looking at opportunities and innovation and all that. I think what this has allowed us to do going through this pandemic, where we all have to tighten our belt, is to get back to the core mission of the role of college athletics and what it's supposed to provide for young people.
There's a lot of great stuff in there. Thank you, Anthony. And I'm sure as we go through this and talk about some of the other topics, the panelists are going to weigh in on some things that you brought up. Thank you. I want to talk to Kristen and Anita a second, and their budgets in public schools there, which their institutions are are mostly funded by student fees. And one of the questions that certainly that I've been thinking about and came up in our prep with this is, how those dollars may be affected, how those student fee dollars, how those student fee amounts may change or are going to change, and how you're going to navigate that challenge in 2021. So, Kristen, or either of you can go first, but have at it.
Sure, I'll go ahead and go first. So fortunately in New York, we currently are maintaining our fees. The National Junior College Athletic Association actually pushed all of our sports to spring semester. So as far as the engagement piece and the returning of fees, even though at the SUNY level that may be on the table a little bit, we are currently, maintaining the budget that we had set upon prior to fall taking place. The other big part for us is that we actually are participating on our campus. And I know Anita will probably touch on that as she goes as well. But we've been able to bring back all of our sports. They have all practiced. We have had limited number of cases on our campus. And so we are looking at the engagement piece of it and hoping that we maintain the funds due to those things, as well as hoping that the spring semester goes off and we are able to return to competition in spring 2021.
Awesome.
Thanks. Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody. It's good to see, well, we can't see you, but it's great to have so many people involved, and I appreciate the opportunity. So as Kelly mentioned, we're in the California State University system. We are a fee-based program. Primarily, we get very little state support for our athletic program. For Chico State, 2021 was already going to be anticipated a down enrollment year. So we were already planning for an enrollment drop before COVID hit. We ended up taking about an 18% cut in our fee budget, but we were able to maintain the remainder of that. So fees were still collected, but it was a drop based on enrollment. One of the challenges for a fee-based institution like ours is we don't really know what our allocation of fees is until we get into March. So we budget backwards, which has always been kind of a fun experience. We get an allocation at the beginning of the year and then we back into that. For our campus, our initial response in the spring was to know if we were going to be able to collect our fee for 2021, and B, quickly pivoted to, what we were required to do was come up with a continuity plan, which basically addressed why we remained essential to be funded for the 2021 year, knowing that we were likely not to do a lot of activity. We are still not doing activity in the CCAA, which is our conference. And it's not looking great for the spring with the recent uptick in cases in the West and the move of California primarily to the worst tier. So for us, it's really been about how do we maintain the staff. We did have to eliminate, I had to non-renew 14 people on my staff as we rolled into the fall. And so we're down to essential head and in some cases first assistant coaches, and that's it. And so like Anthony, we're trying to do as much as we can from a programming perspective virtually to keep our student athletes engaged. Because as an enrollment driven campus, we also, not as high a percentage as our private colleagues, but we do play a role in enrollment for our campus. So the goal will be to come out with a robust spring. And then Kelly, to answer your question, that'll really set up what 2021 looks like. So much of our budget goes to salary and benefits that what we can save this year and roll forward to next year will really impact how we can look forward for 21-22.
Yeah, so that's an interesting situation where you back into your budget, you get your budget in the spring, and then you kind of back into it. Wow, that's a real challenge. So that'll be magnified by what goes on here with the possibility of increased rosters, not knowing what your level of participation will be in 21 or the spring of 20, and then how you set your budget for the 2021 athletic year, and then the dynamic of backing into that when you actually get the numbers in the spring. That's pretty remarkable. Wow. So I'm sure there'll be some other comments about that. Rusty, you're in a unique situation, I think. It's at Midway. You've told us that you were able to, fortunately, you've been able to participate in 80% of your sports in this fall, which is incredible and just wonderful. Talk us how that how you went through that at Midway, and what those challenges were, and the efficiencies you created, and maybe you have some takeaways that we can all learn from, because hopefully we got to all think positive that we get back to that participation levels that you're at right now for the spring.
Kelly, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity. Well, yeah, we, not unlike a lot of small tuition-driven institutions, Midway heavily relies on athletics as a critical component for our enrollment. And so for us, athletic participation this fall was paramount. And so that this summer was there was a lot of people holding their breath whether we were going to be able to come back, and if we weren't going to be able to be in person or participate in intercollegiate athletics, that was going to potentially cause a lot of economic hardship for the institution. Luckily, we were able to do that. And, first and foremost, we're in a part of the country where testing is, widely available, and we were not hit, the country being hit different times with different surges. We were able to start and get things going. And we have a great group of partner institutions that we're in a league with, both in the River States Conference and the Mid-South Conference. And all of our member institutions do a fantastic job of communicating with each other and working with each other to make sure that we can participate. And I think that's a key when you're putting your student athletes on the road to participate against other institutions. You want to make sure that they're put in a safe environment. And I know the leaders at those institutions take that responsibility very seriously. For us, we had 27 sports and over 550 athletes, and 23 of those sports participated in some form of outside competition against another institution this fall. So we were very fortunate. And in 16 weeks of the fall, we had 18 athletes test positive. So you're talking about 1.1 per week. So which is not a terrible number with the sheer volume of athletes we have. And so there was a lot of, takeaways this fall. I think we learned a lot in how to deal with it. I have a unique position in terms of overseeing student affairs as the vice president as well. And so I oversee contact tracing and our COVID response. And so our ability to react quickly and deal with student athletes is pretty streamlined, because I know immediately. And we learned, we definitely learned that maybe the virus is something to be respected, but the initial fear I had when we started was that if we had one case, that within 2 days we would have 50 cases. That I wasn't sure how fast it would spread. I think a lot of us that's probably a similar concern across the country. And I think the more cases you had, the more you understood that how the virus spread. You began to be, comfortable is not the right word, but you begin to understand better that we had no confirmed cases of athletic participation spread during a practice, during travel, any of those things. We started to try to be a little safer in how we travel in terms of limiting, from the get-go, limiting how many players traveled. We always think all of us know that there are a number of players on our roster that travel that are not going to play, that are effectively extra bodies that go. And so we limited that. We tried to limit any trips that involved overnight stays. And if we did have overnight stays, having those stays, putting 2 in a room, though, those are things as this goes on, you keep re-examining, because if you've already exposed them on the bus, what are you doing? I mean, are you really saving anything if they've already been exposed? So these are some things you start looking at. We've invested in, KN95 masks for the student athletes on the bus instead of cloth masks, to try to maybe give them a little safer environment traveling with each other. We don't allow them to eat on the bus together, in those confined spaces. We're adamant about how we break out we have junior varsity programs, how we break out our JVs and varsities. I take basketball, for instance. Your basketball teams, your junior varsity and varsity do not intermingle. So many times the kids who might swing both ways, we don't allow them to. That way you don't have a chance of having a young man who might have practiced with both teams and might put both teams in quarantine. You make sure that your individual groups are very thoughtful how you break those out. Wrestling, we made sure we broke it out by weight class in practice, so that you didn't infect entire teams at a time, and you could, if you lost somebody, you lost a weight class at a time. So just those are some of the approaches we took to doing that, and the list goes on and on, how we the things we learned and the ways we attacked it. And a little bit of looking at the budget, we truly went to a zero-based budget model in terms of, I gave everybody zero budget, and every expense now is manually approved through my office, and we too want to offer the best experience, but I think we just try to be smart about it and spend the money we need to, and maybe baseball doesn't need 4 hats. Maybe they can get by with 2. So I think we all know those things that our teams spend, and that we can effectively cut and not diminish the student athlete experience. So we're trying to do those things, and that's been a way we've run things with the budget at our institution.
Rusty, thank you for your thoughts. That's an interesting comment, that you don't need 4 hats. And if that's the only problem you have, then that's really good. So what it kind of leads into our next question. That's certainly not a pressing budget issue or conversation that would be really tense that you would be having with your baseball coach. But I'd like to ask the whole panel this, and maybe we'll start with Anita, is say, what are some of the most pressing budget issues that you hear about maybe from your coaches? Anita, it's going to be maybe a little tougher for you because you haven't had any participation, but I'm sure those discussions are coming up. And then how do you counsel them during this, and again, going into what possibly may happen in 2021? So we'll start with you and run around the room.
Sure. Well, I think, the primary issue right now, I think there's 2 things. One is, and Rusty alluded to it, it's the things we provide our student athletes that help them feel connected to the program. And we have a vast majority of our freshmen we've never even seen in person yet. So how do you get them inculcated to the culture of the program, and not that that's a high concern, I would say, but it is something that we've talked about. Typically you get your gear, you get your goodies that help you feel like you're part of our Wildcat family, as we call it at Chico. And so that's one thing that we've had to navigate. You know, you got to free up some funds to allow for that engagement to happen. And so we've done a little bit of that. But I would say the number one issue on everybody's minds is how do we rebuild our staffs? We, like probably everybody in this room, rely on those part-time assistant coaches. And those were the folks that we had to non-renew. And so how and when can we bring them back into the fold? We have a hiring chill, we're calling it, on campus right now. When will that be lifted? If we can get back to any in-person activity in the spring, we need more hands on deck. Will we be allowed to do that? So those are the kinds of things that are top of mind right now. And then as we roll into spring, obviously it'll be, you know, are there funds available to do what we can be allowed to do it? And then as we look into fall of 21. So they're bigger ticket items, not necessarily just gear and equipment.
Interesting. You know, we deal in our business, we deal with a lot of athletic trainers. So we're very in tune to what's going on in the athletic training room. So what I'm hearing from athletic trainers is if they've had very limited participation this fall, they're handling that just fine. But talked to a director of sports medicine this morning that said, we're going to have 650 student athletes participating in the spring. I don't know how we'd go nuts if all of them came back for the spring for COVID. Now we have the spring and fall going to be standing outside our room, and we don't have the money in our budget, and we don't have the people on our staff to we have to really figure out a way where we can protect these student athletes the way they need to be protected with that concentration of participation. So that's an interesting dynamic. Anthony, what's your thoughts on this issue in regards to the conversations you've had with coaches and their most pressing budget challenges?
You know, two things. One, how do you prepare for the unknown? And we haven't had the luxury of what Rusty's experienced. Thanks for putting the pressure on all of us, Rusty. But what's acceptable from your institution as far as travel? The accommodations, food delivery, testing. Really looking at the COVID-19 impacts those things before you even start talking about roster sizes, right? And a lot of what I hear is, hey, can I use this line item for something else? As well as, we always start when we get asked questions with it depends, right? And we begin to ask more questions. For us, just so everybody knows, two things. One, we're not in a bus league, so to speak. We travel most of our games by plane because, NYU, Carnegie Mellon, Case, schools of that nature. The only one we bus to is Chicago. So that brings up a different dynamic. But also the fact that we have had fall sports canceled. We're still looking at how we can move forward with winter sports. But it creates this interesting dynamic that you alluded to, Kelly, from the standpoint of if we prioritize our sports, meaning only winter sports can have practice activities, so to speak, then we leave our student athletes open to their own wares because they're not just going to shut down. They're going to go to a middle school. They're going to go to the park, but they don't have the screening process set up. So we could put more of our kids in harm's way. But if we have everybody going at the same time, it really puts a strain on, sports medicine, strain on sports performance, and everybody feels like, how can they get that competitive edge? And really it puts us in administration, because our job, again, is to provide an experience, protect the health, safety, and well-being of staff, coaches, and administration. But where do you start to delineate? Because, we went, from March all the way to mid-August to where everything was virtual. And, you having these virtual workouts and all that. But I can tell you when we started back mid-September, everybody was struggling to get back in shape. But it was euphoric. I mean, it really boosted the morale of coaches, of staff, even myself, to see our kids doing something that provided normacy in their lives, college experience that has really been ripped apart, so to speak. And so, you know, we have some tough conversations that we're going to be discussing in the weeks ahead. Where do we find that sweet spot? And as I alluded to, Kelly, nobody on your staff wants to raise their hand and say, hey, we can't do it. But, you know, as a leader, they're going to come to you privately to say, hey, we're really stretching the bandwidth of both, you know, our human resource and our financial resources, trying to have everybody going full bore at once. When pre-COVID, we've never did that. Everybody had a priority. They had their season, and then you had this short period of your non-traditional season. So that is something that is probably a little bit more pressing out there, because nobody wants to lose ground if opportunities are made available for athletes to do something. But I think us as administrators, as we do with our budgets, we have to be the ones that provide a little bit of reality and try to find that sweet spot of how we can continue to try to manage people's expectations.
Yeah, it's really a tough balance. But so, Kristen, I want to bring you into this question, but also expand on it a little bit here, because we've had some activity on the chat here, and Jill McCabe, thanks for your question, Jill. But she asked about, you know, did your coaches are they determining the number of student athletes that travel, and, you know, or was it a conference or governing body decision on the number of student athletes that could travel? And I guess in some ways, if the conference makes that decision or the governing body, it takes the institution a little bit off the hook right there. So Kristen, you weigh in with your conversation on that issue and conversations with your coaches about these tough budget issues. And then I want to come back to you, Rusty, about what your conference is doing.
Well, I'm glad I'm not last, because when you go last, your list gets shorter and shorter of things you're supposed to contribute to the group. But as far as the roster sizes and limitations as far as travel goes, our region has been talking about these things, and, you know, basically determining per sport, what is the number of student athletes that you actually need at your competition to be able to participate, as well as the limitations on the buses. You know, on a 56 passenger bus, if you're seating everyone by themselves, how many athletes and coaches can you actually take to a contest without increasing your budget to take, you know, 2 buses to each event? So that's definitely a discussion at a regional level. I don't know at the junior college level, it may be a discussion for them as well. But I do think that regions across the board are discussing that. As far as the backtracking to things, as far as the pressing budget issues, at the JUCO level, it's really a little bit different, I think, than anybody else on this panel, because my coaches are asking the question of, if we don't play in the spring, do we get paid? Are we having a salary? You know, it's different because my coaches aren't full-time. My coaches are part-time. Very few of the junior college level across the board have full-time coaches for every sport. The other big thing for us is the lack of fundraising. So at our institutions, fundraising provide those extra things that Anita and Rusty were talking about. If we're getting 4 baseball hats, I'm certainly not paying for all 4 of them, believe me. So that's another thing, being that, you know, we can't open up our indoor facility for us to run camps and clinics and the different fundraisers. So our staff has had to be really creative in the fundraising efforts that are going on currently. And the last thing that I don't think anybody really hit upon is the additional protocols as far as the PPE stuff and the testing, and who's paying for this. Is it your budget, or is it the college that's going to supplement that additional funds? You know, if us as a region determine that for baseball, we have to roll out, you know, 8 to 10 brand new baseballs for, you know, every single team for each game, that's an additional cost that's going to eventually add up for our institutions. And so, you know, who's paying for those? How are we running these sports? Like, all those questions are great things, but we also have to determine, you know, all these protocols that are wonderful things to keep our athletes safe, we still have to have the funding to do so. So
I didn't think there'd be extra baseballs because of COVID.
So the talk right now is to have, you know, everyone keeps their own baseballs. So if you are the home team, you take your balls out with you. And if you are the away team, same thing, you switch with the umpire so that you're actually not intermingling game balls.
Wow. Those are the tentacles. So Rusty, back to you. I just, want to hear a little bit more about, how you're determining those roster sizes and those types of things.
Sure, we let the coaches basically determine those. I mean, I step in if need be. And a lot of that's dictated by your travel situation as well. If you own your own vehicles, if you're leasing, if you're renting or chartering, we have our own vehicles, and so we took each one in their maximum capacity and limited how many we would put in each vehicle. So that limited it immediately. So we took soccer. Our soccer coach is notoriously women's soccer, for instance. He for some reason thinks he needs 4 players every game. And this year we told soccer that 17, 18 is about all you need to take to a match and so our game. And so that's we kind of worked with them to use that, mainly because that was what we limited to our particular buses they would take. They could take 18. And so that was out of necessity in our situation. Not because I thought 18 sounded like a great number. Obviously, I wasn't a soccer coach, so my expertise isn't in that area. But it made sense for our situation, and so you can take that across the board. As far as the budget concerns, the schedule and its effect on transportation is outside of the PPE costs that we're incurring, is probably the immediate thing that worries me for the spring, because of the things we've pushed off. And as we've gotten into basketball season, scheduling basketball contests has turned into scheduling baseball and softball in rainy season. Our women's basketball team played their 7th contest last night, and the previous 6 they played were not on the original schedule to start the season. So that was the first actually scheduled contest that was on the original schedule. Was the 7th contest we played. So that was it's been an adventure, and I think everybody in our conference and this geographic area who's playing would say the same thing. And it's become rather amusing because some team goes into quarantine, and then all of a sudden massive emails start going out looking for games, and then sure enough, all of a sudden 2 teams just hook it up and start playing, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. And so I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, that culture already kind of existed in softball and baseball with the ability to move games quickly and be nimble. Basketball's not been notoriously known for that, but we'll see that. And so this spring could be quite the adventure with a number of conferences moving sports and pushing everything back to the spring. And I know we don't have the transportation or the game day administration staff. I know a lot of smaller institutions are limited in their sports information staffs and their game day staffs to effectively run, when things start piling up, to effectively run things on campus. So that's a concern for us as well.
Thank you, Rusty. Rusty, there's another question for you down there on the chat, if you take a look at it, and then we'll bring it up live as well, but I'll give you a chance to take a look at it. It's on the Q&A first. But, back to you, Anthony. You've already alluded to some of this, but all of you can probably weigh in on this. You have budgets that in the spring of 2020 that you didn't use, and you're not using them this fall. I mean, you're not using your travel budget, probably not using a recruiting budget. You're not, there's a lot of money that's really unspent if you're not participating. So going into 2000 in the spring, and then thinking about 21 ahead, do you reduce those travel recruiting budgets, or do you maintain them at the pre-COVID levels, those types of things? I talked to some schools that have said, hey, we had to reduce everything 10% right away. And then my question was, well, is Mr. Athletic Director, is that 10% coming back in 2021? And their answer was, I doubt it, you know, that kind of thing. So I'd like, maybe Anthony, you can weigh in on that first, and then we'll go to Anita and Kristen.
So some of our situation a little bit is unique, Kelly, from the standpoint of a lot of the endowments that we have are tied to travel. So that really won't necessarily be something that you can kind of carry over, so to speak, because of the uniqueness of our conference. And we're one of the charter members. The previous two previous chancellors really kind of put an endowment in place so we can kind of protect that experience for our student athletes. But aside from that, you know, there has to be core things that you have put into, you know, priority one as far as what you want to protect. And for us, you know, where we're at, and all politics are local, where we're at is, you know, one of those things is recruiting. We want to protect that because we want to continue to do the hard work of diversifying our rosters, so to speak. And for us, you know, the next thing would be, you know, what parts of the experience can we protect? What parts is really excess that really is not core to the experience? And then similar to what one of the panelists alluded to is, you know, we need to make room for development and the programming for development. With everything that has gone on, especially, you know, we call it the summer of George Floyd, we need to, you know, try to carve out resources, not just for SAC to create space to have these tough conversations to kind of get active, but also for different pockets of our student athlete community as we try to move forward. And then something that's in the rearview mirror for us is really mental health. It's going to be an issue. It continues to be an issue, and it's really going to be an issue going forward. And I'm not just talking about for our student athletes, I'm also talking about for our coaches and administration. And so there's parts to that what can the budget handle? And then what on campus can we kind of, you know, do through partnerships and alliances? Where can we do what I call above and beyond sourcing funds outside of through private donations to really kind of earmark and target these things, these resources, because we really don't know what the future holds. And if we are going down the same path in D3 right now, I think it's about 45% that have chose not to participate in winter competition, then we need to be ready to handle that part of these student athletes' lives being taken away and being able to try to mitigate what that could end up being by trying to have some things in place. And some of that starts with creating space. Some of that starts with trying to provide mental health services and the like. So it's kind of, you know, some of the things that's at the forefront as we try to look forward to 2021, trying to keep a good pulse from SAC, executive committee, giving us some insight, our coaches, giving us some insight, because I think the direction that we're going needs to include those voices ultimately, so we can try to endure. 10 months have been tough.
Some good thoughts there. And the mental health issue is something that's not cheap to deal with. You know, as you all know, secondary insurances, secondary athletic insurance companies are not covering mental health issues. They're not paying for them. So it's going to have to be the student athlete's private insurance, or it's going to have to be those partnerships that Anthony talked about, whether it's a counseling center on your campus and whether or not they have the ability and the resources to take care of this. There's going to be an influx of these issues. We've already seen it. I've seen it at a lot of schools where there's a influx of mental health issues, and they're focused. Basic substance abuse is one of them, and it's on the schools that aren't participating mostly. It's the schools that aren't participating that are having the most problems with that kind of thing. So,
Kelly, can I add the fact that no college is set up for long-term healthcare? And you know, we have to approach it realistically of what can we provide. And no student is born on campus. Like, we take on whatever they bring to campus, whatever shortcomings they have, just like we, you know, prize the great talent that they have. And so, you know, that's something that you bring up a good point, that, you know, we have to figure out a way to kind of manage this for all of us, not just schools like the Power Five who have a lot of resources to throw towards it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So Kristen, on to you. What are your thoughts around, you know, budgets with coming budgets with travel and recruiting and those types of things, and whether or not you're going to maintain them or whether or not you're going to have to reduce them permanently for the time being, that kind of thing?
So already prior to the pandemic hitting, we were already projecting that we were going to have a 15% decrease. And so with the additional money that we saved from last spring season, we actually get to carry a fund balance. And so moving forward, if we can maintain the status of where we're at right now, then we could still, you know, have the same experience for our student athletes: travel, recruiting, apparel, all those things, supplies, equipment. And we would just have to dip a little bit into our fund balance until we hopefully recover from this whole thing, even though, you know, we're not going to see the effect of this for another 3 years. We're going to be in this for a long time to come, even when we do return to competition. So, you know, we're fortunate in that aspect that we do have that fund balance, but some institutions don't have that, and that's a different story for them.
Well, that's good news, and hopefully, you know, you'll be able to carry that balance forward for 21 and maintain what your experience. And that's what this theme has been. Anthony, you started, but everybody's kind of picked up on that theme of, you know, this is the experience for the student athlete and maintaining that. What's necessary, what's mandatory, what's, you know, what can you toss over to the side right now, and what are the absolute essentials that you must have. Anita, any thoughts on this topic?
Well, I would echo what Kristen just said. I think, you know, we've been advised, at least in our system, to plan for, you know, at least a 3-year impact on this. And of course, that'll depend on how enrollment really shakes out. So, you know, and I would also say from our perspective, you know, yes, competition ended in early March, but in our conference, we were already a third of the way through most of our spring sports. So the cost savings from spring of 20 wasn't huge. And so, you know, we're having to balance out this year. Any cost savings we were able to carry forward, we're still managing with the reduction that we saw this year. So those are kind of things you have to, you know, plan for over the course of the year. There's a question in the chat about the creative budget cut, and I would.
A great question. I was going to bring that up. That's a great question from John DeAndrade. Go ahead, Anita.
And I don't really have an answer, John, to a budget cut, but what I will say is our campus was I describe us as a very brick and mortar, paper heavy campus. And one of the things that we were forced to do, like everyone, you know, we shut down in a week's time and became a virtual campus. And what we've been able to take away from that is an efficiency of a lot of our paper processes that, you know, it sounds like not a lot of money, but it is money. When you don't have to make copies and you have more efficient processes for your staff, so you can repurpose folks doing things that maybe they weren't doing before. And so the domino effect of how that impacts your budget, so that you can prioritize and you can emerge out of this by prioritizing the things that are necessary for our student athletes, for the health and safety situation, and for making that experience good. And I think that's one of the things I've really tried to focus my staff on, is how do we come out of this working smarter so that we can prioritize our resources to the place where they need to be, which is supporting return to activity and return for our student athletes.
You know, I think to echo some of that, I think, you know, it took the pandemic for me to get 27 different sports to use DocuSign, which I mean, I hope a lot of our coaches finally are like, yeah, I never want to actually physically sign a letter of intent or anything again. A lot of them have been converted into that, but a couple creative things that other people probably were doing but we were not. One in particular, we started to, from a revenue standpoint, it wasn't a cut necessarily. We started to broadcast and live stream our junior varsity contests, which, since we were not allowing fans, and when you have this many athletes and have a number of junior varsity contests, and we have a revenue split pay-per-view content, and so that obviously generated more pay-per-view revenue, which helped offset some of the loss in gate receipts. And then to forestall some of the potential budget cuts that could have been out there, I went to academics and volunteered our staff to a number of our coaches, having a large staff, have master's degrees, and had our staff basically take on the responsibility of teaching the first year experience class. And that actually saved the institution about $25,000 in adjunct fees in one semester. And so that essentially was, the CFO was extremely happy with that move. The coaches, not so much, but that was a creative way we were able to save the institution a chunk of change in this tough time.
That's pretty creative. That's pretty good. Both of those ideas are pretty creative. Anthony, Kristen, go ahead.
I'd actually like to chime in, because I actually, similar to what Rusty just said, forward thinking, as the pandemic hit, we all could see that we weren't playing spring sports before they actually canceled them. And we knew that there was a chance that we would lose some of our staff. So as we had retirements take place on our campus and movement that was taking place, people would leave. I would strategically try to place my staff into those positions, or oversee those positions, or correlate it somehow to how one of my staff members did, or what their current job responsibilities were, so that they could actually be, save the college that money and be, indispensable at that point. For example, my assistant athletic director does all of our scheduling, all of our van travel, everything on our campus, but was not doing it for the entire campus. Well, now he currently is doing it for the entire campus. So it's things like that could, help to make me feel better and sleep at night, because I know that I will be able to retain my staff at the end of the day. A couple of my coaches, as everyone knows on this call, your coaches know the process. They know the admissions process. They know the financial aid. They know a lot of our people know a lot of the different areas on our campus. So a few of my coaches have actually transitioned and will be helping out in the Success Center or in our admissions department, filing applications. So the one of the questions that we were going to hit later on was, what is the takeaway that you could give? And it's basically to, don't leave any rock unturned, and any idea at this point is a good one, and make sure that anything crazy or not, like, you should definitely run it up the flagpole and see if it's something that can work on your campus. So
I don't have much to add, Kelly, but what I will say is strategy is critical. And we got our staff, our coaches involved in some initiatives, this student health ambassadors, students trying to encourage other students to wear the mask, walk around campus with hand sanitizer, et cetera. We led that charge, and really that helped the university create a safe environment, because we needed people to buy into this hybrid situation, because we needed tuition. We also got involved in contact tracing, which has proved to be a win-win, because it keeps me ahead of what's happening, who's going to isolation, et cetera. But it also just controls the narrative of athletics and recreation willing to do whatever it takes to help the university. And that plays a huge part if you're at a university or an institution that's high touch. It's all about relationships. It's not transactional, right? And people think about that. And they think about that when they have to, and you have to make tough decisions, because it's never good to build relationships in an emergency, right? when people know what you're about, what you're trying to provide for student athletes, and they know you're willing to go above and beyond for others, it helps play well in the sandbox for the long term. And so I would say I can't really identify one creative budget reduction, but I can identify a creative approach that's so far outside of the realm of pre-COVID that we were lucky enough to have staff really kind of take on for the greater benefit of the enterprise of athletics and recreation.
That's great stuff. All of you brought some great stuff right here. I think we're already to that last question about takeaways. You've already given some great takeaways, and I want thanks for that question, John, because it really provoked some really good discussion right here. But we've got about 5 minutes left here, and quickly I want to talk about the money that's raised through athletics, through camps and clinics and those types of things. You all have them. Many of those were canceled, or if not all of them canceled in the summer. Thoughts about how are you going to get back to there? Are you going to do virtual events? Any type of out of the box type things that you're going to do to raise money, maybe outside of those camps and clinics, or you're just hoping that they come back in the summer of 21? So who wants to jump in? Free for all.
Kelly, I'll jump in. I don't know if we're going to get back to the traditional camp clinic in the near future, but one of the things that I would, as a takeaway, I would like to offer, we spent a lot of, like I'm sure everybody, we spent a lot of the first 6 months really focused on what needed to be taken care of for our student athletes and for our staff. And it's only been in the last couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, that we've really been able to shift toward sort of that external audience that we haven't had time or bandwidth to really engage with. And what we've found in the last month is, as we've started talking to folks and explaining to them what we've been trying to do, how we've been trying to preserve the experience for our student athletes, then their philanthropic spirit is showing up for our programs. And so I think for us, the takeaway is, no, we're probably not going to get those events and those camps back like we've traditionally done. But maybe there's an opportunity with more one-on-one, getting coaches connected with donors, and really showing folks what we're trying to do to maintain that high-touch experience that Anthony just mentioned. Because I think all of the institutions represented in these 4 divisions, that's what we do. We're not on the ticker, right? But we are taking care of our student athletes, and folks need to hear that from us. So that would be my takeaway, is don't forget your external audience in however you can do that.
That's a really good one, Anita. Thank you very much. Other folks, there's one other question I want to try to get in here, but if you can give me a quick 20 or 30-second answer on this. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'd just say it depends on the vaccine for me. I mean, it just depends on whether we can do anything with summer camps, things like that. It's in COVID time, when you're talking about what's going to happen in May, June, that's like talking about 2035.
Good point.
It's hard to get my mind around that.
Good point. Yeah, we've all gone through so many quick changes. And so many turnovers on the football field that we don't know what's going to happen next. I can appreciate that. Any other comments on this issue? I want to ask one more question.
The only thing I would add, because I think Anita hit everything right on the head as far as pivoting to virtual events and all that, is 2 things. One, it's not just the money that's lost, but it's the connections in the community that's lost when you don't do camps and you don't get young people to aspire to want to be on your campus or whatever your mascot is. And the second thing, Kelly, that I think is also important, and Anita hit on this, is I think we've probably honed in on really having a more targeted message that really speaks to our needs a little bit more, and then having it filter down to the coaches being able to make those connections with alumni in these virtual spaces that now, you never want to waste a good crisis, right? To where you got the attention, you got the focus. This is what we need you to do. So some coaches who have been introverted are now willing to do whatever it takes and willing to take good, really direction on how to message and how to connect. I think that has allowed us to really hit the reset button. The second thing, because I was trying to buy time because I lost my train of thought, is if you are doing sponsorship contracts, there's a term called force majeure you need to include in every contract because that covers a pandemic, and that will help you through this process, because we don't know, as Rusty alluded to, we don't know when this thing is going to be to the point where we no longer have to wear a mask and look over our shoulder.
Great insight. Thank you for that, Anthony. Last question here, and if we go a little bit over, it's okay. That's what the boss has just told me. So if we've got recently, I guess it was today, I didn't see it, but the CDC had new rules lowering quarantine to 7 days and with test and 10 without. So has there been any response from either conference, governing bodies, discussions about what you need to do in quarantine in a reaction to what the CDC says is now the right thing to do? Who has a comment on that?
Well, no response as of yet that I've seen from the people we deal with, but that is going to be helpful for us. We're going to have to take a strong look at it in how we do things, not just with student athletes, but with students in general. We'll likely have two different standards as we had before for those who live in community living on campus and for those who live off campus for quarantine because we had the same thing for those who in isolation who had been infected. It was 10 days for mild or asymptomatic for those who were off campus, but we required 14 for those who lived on campus because of the communal living rigors to make sure that we didn't spread infection. So this is so new, we're still evaluating the process, but I am encouraged, by the ability for an asymptomatic student athlete to test out, after 7 days or 10 days, depending on if you want to modify the policy.
Yeah, certainly would save a little bit of money if you're paying, as you are, Rusty, paying for a hotel to quarantine folks.
Yeah, quarantining that many people in hotels off campus when if they're on-campus students is rather pricey.
Yeah. Any other comments on that issue? Okay. Well, I've got to say, I really enjoyed this. I thank all of you for being involved and taking your time to share your insight with the people that have joined today. We really appreciate it. And hope your bellies are still full from Thanksgiving. I know mine is. And we'll see you all soon. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.